Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. President Kimball was faced with many of the same problems as President McKay, as far as with members of the 12 having conflicting views about what to do about the ban. In our next conversation with Dr. Matt Harris, we're going to uncover what President Kimball did to help persuade others in the quorum to come around to lifting the ban. I think there's some really amazing stuff in here. You'll definitely want to check this out. Hey, I just want to remind everybody, thank you. We've gotten a bunch more subscribers on YouTube. Please share that as much as you can with other people. We'd love to help as many people learn more about church history as we can. Also, if you could leave us a review on iTunes, hopefully a 5-star review, that'll help more people find out more about us. Thanks again. Now back to our conversation. All right, so just wanted to follow up on this Monroe Fleming. So that kind of blew my mind a little bit. So the one thing that I wanted to ask was, so when McKay was going to ordain him to the, I assume to the priesthood, whether it was Aaronic or Melchizedek, I guess it doesn't matter. But was that going to be like a big announcement, and then, hey, this is the first guy, and we're just going to do this for everybody, or was this just a, you know what, you're a good guy, we're going to do this for you, and you're the exception? Or what was the thought process there?
Well, the evidence isn't clear. It was just that we're going to ordain a loyal Negro at the Hotel Utah. In fact, it doesn't even say Monroe Fleming's name in the document. But the loyal Negro at the Hotel Utah is Monroe Fleming. He had been working there for years. And church leaders all knew him. Of course, it's a church-owned property. And he was a very faithful member. I think he joins in the early 50s. So clearly he's a pioneer in the church. He comes of age in the church before the priesthood revelation. And so he understands the restriction. But it's not clear if there's going to be an announcement, or it's just that we're going to ordain this loyal Negro man. That's all it is. And so Monroe Fleming, I think Hugh B. Brown mentions Monroe Fleming in a different document. But the McKay document that I have, it's just a loyal Negro member of the Hotel Utah.
Wow. So was he upset when this didn't happen, or do we have his reaction?
Oh, I wish we knew. I can say a couple things that over the years, there were some newspaper reports when the revelation came out that they interviewed some prominent black LDS men, and Monroe Fleming is one of them. So if you look at the Salt Lake Tribune, the Deseret News from the summer of '78, when the priesthood revelation came out, they would interview these black Latter-day Saints and ask about the ban. And Monroe Fleming is there, and I waited patiently for this, and I'm so happy to have the priesthood and this sort of thing. But he wasn't patient. He's not happy. He's working behind the scenes. He's writing scholars. He writes a man named Heber Snell, who worked for the church education system as an institute teacher, and he subsequently gets fired, I think reinstated, because of some of his controversial teachings, allegedly on the Old Testament. Yeah, his name is Heber Snell, and he writes Heber Snell, and he said, what does the scripture say about the ban? So he recognizes Snell as an authority figure. And Snell has a PhD from Chicago Divinity School in Old Testament studies, I think, or something. Back in the day when the CES used to send people back east for secular training.
There was a great article, I'm trying to remember where that was, called The Chicago Experiment. Was he part of those original?
He was.
That's really cool.
Now, there's a few of them. T. Edgar Lyon, a guy named Sidney B. Sperry, Russell Swenson, and Heber Snell. Yeah, there's like 5 or 6 of them that go back, and he's definitely one of them. Anyway, getting off topic here, but Snell writes a book that they wanted to use in the CES system. It was, I can't remember the title of it, the Ancient Israelite Heritage or something. Anyway, Joseph Fielding Smith thought it was too secular, and some of the other apostles loved it and thought it was great. But clearly it was informed by his training at Chicago Divinity School and his study of Semitic languages. And anyway, so he was controversial for this CES system that was becoming increasingly orthodox after World War II. And so they wanted to try him for his membership at one point, and Sterling McMurrin and President McKay, I think, stepped in and said to Joseph Fielding, we're not going to cut this good man off. But anyway, so word gets out to Monroe Fleming that this guy's a authority figure in the scriptures, and he wanted to know from Heber Snell, what do the scriptures say about the priesthood ban? And Snell, by the way, did not believe in the ban. He was very clear that he didn't think it was justified scripturally. He didn't think it was humane, a whole number of things. And so I think Monroe Fleming felt a kindred spirit in reaching out to Heber Snell. He also sent a couple of letters to other people expressing his disappointment with not being able to hold the priesthood. In the meantime, publicly, he's meeting with missionaries at the old Hotel Utah where he worked, and he's bearing his testimony. This is God's church, and I know that the band's inspired. So he's having this challenge, saying one thing in public and saying something in private. And but anyway, when the band comes around, he's one of the first black men, or when the band's lifted, he's one of the first black men to be ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood.
Oh, wow.
Recognizing, not the first, I think there's a guy named Joseph Freeman who's on record.
I think he lives here in Colorado, I believe.
Does he? Okay.
Denver,
Yeah.
I believe, or he used to. I don't know if he still does.
I think you're right, yeah. He'd be a nice guy to interview,
I know,
I'm sure.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you knew
Yeah,
him. Do
no,
you know
I
him?
don't.
No?
I wish I did. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. Have his book, though, in the Lord's due time, yeah. Anyway, so Monroe Fleming was one of the ones that they ordained first. And it's interesting, a lot of the general authorities who grew up and came of age in church leadership with this ban, I mean, they recognized the hardships that the ban posed on people and families. And President Monson, the current church president, was close to the Monroe Fleming. And he told Monroe Fleming's family, his daughters, this would have been in the early 80s, and 83 in fact. Monroe Fleming, I think, dies in 83. But then Apostle Monson told Fleming's family and his secretary in the apostleship, in the Quorum of the 12, if I'm away on church business when this man passes, I'm going to come back, drop everything, and I'll be back to his funeral. And strangely enough, he was away on church business, and he got the call, and he came back, and he spoke at Monroe Fleming's funeral. Wow. And there are some personal relationships that the brethren will develop with these black Latter-day Saints. And I read this, that they feel compassion that the church is shutting them out. Mm-hmm. And just jumping the gun for a moment, but a number of the apostles will reach out to some of their personal relationships after the revelation's lifted to let them know first, you're hearing it from me, that we lifted this. Oh, wow. Yeah. So they take there's a handful of them that do this. Gordon Hinckley's another one. And they take a personal interest in some of the suffering that these black saints had under this ban. And just one last thought along these lines, that when the revelation is lifted, of course, the biggest church leader to fight this for years was Hugh B. Brown. And it cost him his position in the first presidency. He's dropped from the first presidency because of his very vocal proselytizing, crusading, if you will. And anyway, so he's dropped, and it crushes him. He's upset by this. And he's on the outs with some church leaders, to be perfectly honest. But his heart was pure, and Brown dies in 1975. And 3 years later, when the revelation occurs, of course, he's not around. And N. Eldon Tanner, Gordon Hinckley, and a new apostle named James Faust, they call Brown's family, including his grandson, with whom I've spoken, and they say, your grandfather would have loved to have seen this day. And this is hours after the revelation, the same day. And of course, that's tacit acknowledgement of the bitter battles that Grandpa Brown, President Brown, had fought trying to get this ban lifted. And these three brethren, Ellen Tanner, James Faust, and Gordon Hinckley, recognized it and wanted to acknowledge that to the family. And I take that as a way to heal old wounds, too. Mm-hmm. That, we've come full circle. And so I thought that was kind of a moving moment when I read the transcripts of the calls. Wow. Yeah, because the relative gave me the transcripts.
Is that going to be in your book?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I will be one of the first to buy it.
Yeah. I have so much material that I've never seen before, and it's such a moving story in many ways, with black people in the church, white people, because they just have this policy, and the church has boxed themselves in, and they don't feel like they can move it or change it. Mm-hmm. And they agonize over it. And you see this when you read their journals. I mean, Spencer Kimball, I've gone through his journals. I've been very privileged from his family to see those journals in the church archivists. And it's moving to see his journals, because when he's an apostle in the 1960s, part of his jurisdiction is over South America. So he's visiting these branches and these wards. And he talks about this in his journal. He's a great diarist. And these South American saints will come up to him after the meeting and say, I pay my tithing, I'm faithful. When can I hold the priesthood? And it just crushes Elder Kimball, who recognizes that this branch needs priesthood leadership. And these are faithful people. But yet this policy has shut them out. And he agonizes over it, completely agonizes over it. And so it's not surprising that when he's the church president, here's something provocative for you. When he's the church president, the first thing he wants to do is to lift the ban. He has all of these experiences that he's gathered. He has, keep in mind, in the fall of '69, he's already agreed to lift the ban, right?
Right.
He's already gone on record to his son, in a letter that he writes his son Edward in 1963. He said, I think this ban might be a possible error.
Really?
It's the word he uses.
In '63.
'63, a possible error. So he's been wrestling with this ban for a while. And anyway, so he's already agreed to lift it. He's already had all of those experiences in South America. And but he's got some challenges. He has the same challenges that President McKay had. He's got some doctrinal hardliners, right? Mm-hmm. He's got people in the South who have some very deep-rooted racial views.
Well, so it's interesting to me that you say that was one of the first things that he was going to do was lift it, because if I remember correctly, it seems like at his first news conference, just like Harold B. Lee's first conference, one of the first questions was, are you going to lift the ban? And he said, I have no plans to do so.
Oh, I know what he says.
So, but you say that he really was going to do that right away?
Yeah.
Because it was 1974 when he was named church president, or? Yeah,
was it December of '73, I think, when he's ordained? I think December.
Okay.
Late '73, yeah.
So, I mean, so that's another 4 years. So if that's the first thing he's going to do, why does it take 4 years?
That's a great question. So, so President Kimball is a great student of church history. And he has lived through the David O. McKay years, which were very contentious, with all due respect. President McKay, his declining health over the years, had created a power vacuum, really. And there were some folks who argued the first presidency counselors should be really making firm decisions for the church, and others thought it should resort back to the collective body of the quorum. And you see this happen in church history a lot. You saw it happen in the 80s with Gordon B. Hinckley, when Marion G. Romney and then Ellen Tanner were incapacitated along with President Kimball, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and arguably, I don't know about today, but maybe you see it happening with, Thomas S. Monson. And does President Eyring or President Uchtdorf call the shots, or is it the senior leadership in the 12, the guy that's going to be the next church president? So you do see these sorts of very difficult things pop up. And anyway, I think Greg Prince says nicely that there was, and Gary Bergera has written some articles about this, about how contentious some of these years were with these factions vying for power. And anyway, but President Kimball has seen, so he's witnessed firsthand some of those challenges from the 50s and 60s under President McKay's leadership. And there were schisms in the quorum, to be honest. He was part of some of those schisms. And, but more importantly, he looks back at President Wilford Woodruff's administration, where he has a revelation, lifts the polygamy, the first manifesto, issues the first manifesto, and you're a student of church history, you know what happens. Half the quorum falls away.
My current interview is with Ann Wild right now, and that's exactly
what
we're
nice,
talking about.
nice. Yeah, I like her, she's a gem. So anyway, but President Woodruff doesn't get buy-in from the 12, and this is, God spoke to me, and we're going to issue this manifesto, and we're going to end polygamy. And of course, the brethren in the 12 they're split. Mm-hmm. And so, you know the story, half of them get excommunicated, and they start to replace them with monogamists, like David O. McKay. So when McKay comes in 1906, the guy who he's replacing is a polygamist. And so the litmus test is you're a monogamist, right? So anyway, so Kimball knows the consequences of doing something unilaterally without quorum buy-in. He sees that in church history, and he experiences it himself in the McKay administration. And so President Kimball recognizes this is such a delicate task, and that if he's going to make this arguably, probably the most momentous, not arguably, in the 20th century, it's the most momentous decision in the history of the church. Second, maybe only to plural marriage, right? Giving black people the priesthood. So he knows he has to have buy-in. And how do you get buy-in with people that have these very, very deep-suited racial views? I mean, you know, Elder McConkie's Mormon doctrine, he comes into the Quorum of the 12 in 1972. But yet he had been this very larger-than-life personality even before he's an apostle, right? Writing this controversial book called Mormon Doctrine that's published in 1958. So he's worried about the doctrinal hardliners. He doesn't have Harold B. Lee or Joseph Fielding Smith to contend with, but he still has Mark E. Peterson and Bruce R. McConkie. And he has some other general authorities who are products of their generation, right? They have some hard views about people of color.
Maybe Benson.
Elder Benson. We'll talk about him in a minute. Yes, it's true. Elder Benson, and Delbert Stapley is another one that has some very hard racial views. But anyway, so President Kimball, this is really, I think, the genius of his leadership. One of the first things he does is he recognizes he has to get buy-in from the 12. How do you do this? And, well, he uses a variety of things. I mean, really. One of the things he does is he announces a temple in Brazil. Oh, gee. You know, I mean, it's like 85% biracial. Ed Kimball, I love Ed, and I love his work, and he wrote something in that book that, you know, like his father was just oblivious about the racial, or something like that. I'm like, Ed, I interviewed Ed years ago, and he's really a wonderful man. And I said, oh, Ed, come on, your father knew the racial makeup. He'd been there as an apostle, you know, and he just kind of gave me that Ed Kimball twinkle. Anyway, I have nothing but respect for that man and his father. But anyway, so President Kimball announces the Brazil Temple. And this is a bulwark to help the brethren to come along with this. He recognizes that you can't have a temple in this heavily biracial nation where the people who sacrifice and do so much to build the temple, they're shut off from it. I mean, he understands this. This is just not good policy. You know? We're going to make you sacrifice and work so hard. Those are the days when you built it yourself, right? Mm-hmm. You didn't have Salt Lake writing you a check. So these guys are donating. They're really sacrificing hard to build the temple, and they can't go. And Helvecio Martins, the late general authority, I mean, this is his story, right? Mm-hmm. He does so much to build this temple, and he's shut off by it. And Kimball is there. And he pulls Martins. He'd heard from other people. James Faust, who was the general authority in charge of Brazil at the time, he heard from Brother Faust that we've got this wonderful Negro man named Helvecio Martins, and he really is, he's one of the finest in the church. And Kimball meets him at the dedication of the Brazil Temple. And he tells him, he said, remain faithful. Good things will happen. I'm paraphrasing, but remain faithful. There's something coming. And
what year is this approximately?
This is 70, oh boy, was it the Cornerstone 75 maybe?
75? Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Don't quote me on that.
3 years early, roughly.
Yeah. So President Kimball is saying something pretty early on to Martins. Maybe it's a year later. I don't recall, but it might have been the foundation or something. I don't think it was the final dedication. I'll have to look at that. But anyway, so the Brazil Temple is a way to let's try to help the brethren understand that we've got to do something here.
So this was very strategic.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
One of the first things that he does as church president is to push for this Brazil Temple. Not coincidental.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Matt Harris. In our next conversation, we'll talk about a conversation that President Kimball had with a member of the Carter administration who was also a Mormon.
Calls in Jack Carlson, and his wife too is there. It's just the three of them, President Kimball and the Carlsons. And he says, Jack, why do the Carter people hate us so much? He said, President, don't you get it? He said, no, tell me. That's why you're here. He said, they hate our views on ERA, our views towards women in ERA. And this is in the midst of the ERA movement. And of course, Utah was a holdup, one of the arguably one of the states that kills the amendment, to be honest. And the church was against it, and that galvanized support, or opposition, I should say. And the other thing is, they don't like our views towards black people. And President Kimball, without missing a beat, he says, we've got to change this policy. But I can't. I'm worried. I'm worried about how the saints in the South will take this policy.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you like our page on facebook.com/gospeltangents. You can subscribe at youtube.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter @gospeltangents, as well as make sure that you subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any of our episodes. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our videos. Thanks again.